Hi everybody, we're going to work on more histology, this time concluding our study of tissues with muscle and nervous tissues. Now in your course pack, this information is covered on page 48. So for every major category of tissue type we've studied, there's been some hallmark feature that allows us to separate or understand that that tissue is different or unique from other tissues. What makes muscle tissue different and unique is its long cylindrical cells or somewhat spindle-shaped cells. There's no apical surface or basement membrane here, as you would have seen with epithelial tissue, and we don't see fiber types here either, as you would have seen with, say, connective tissue. All muscle tissue is built for movement and contraction, so that's why we tend to see this particular shape of cells. There's only 3 types of muscle tissue here. I know that's good news after hearing so many types of connective tissues. These are, of course, much easier to keep straight than all those connective and epithelial tissues. They are often named for their locations. Skeletal muscle is attached to the skeleton. Cardiac muscle is found, guess where? In the heart. And smooth muscle is named for a lack of striations. So not necessarily where it's located, but what it's missing. This graphic shows us how the types of tissues overlap with some characteristics. There are 2 types of striated muscle tissue. Striations are striping, so if I were to draw a piece of muscle tissue here, it would be a banding pattern like you see here. So we have 2 types that are striated. We have skeletal muscle and we have cardiac muscle. Only smooth muscle is unstriated. That means that its cells do not have any kind of banding pattern. All right, so smooth muscle is unique in that aspect. We also have 2 types of muscle tissue that are involuntary. That means that they do not need conscious control to make them contract. That includes our cardiac muscle tissue and our smooth muscle tissue. The only type of tissue that's voluntarily controlled is skeletal muscle tissue, so that aspect makes it unique. Let's talk first about skeletal muscle tissue. Of course, this one is found attached to our skeleton and moves our bones. These light and dark banding patterns that you see here are called striations. Even nicer picture here. And you'll also notice there's nuclei scattered among these cells. These types of skeletal muscle cells or muscle fibers are called multinucleate. Back when the skeletal muscle tissue was forming, these cells fused together and formed a really long cylindrical or straw-shaped cell. That's why you're going to find many nuclei inside of a single skeletal muscle tissue cell, which we sometimes call a muscle fiber. All right, so let's take a look at another one. Again, this striation pattern is the banding pattern, the light and dark banding pattern. And these dark spots, these are nuclei, which makes this tissue type full of multinucleate cells. Great picture here of skeletal muscle cells running through some other type of tissue. Here's a bunch of them running through. You'll notice that this type of tissue is ultimately attached to skeletal system components like your bones. They also help us to move our facial tissue, which in some cases they may not be as obviously attached to bones as they are in other parts of the body, but we do know that skeletal muscle tissue is voluntary and can help move our bodies. This type of tissue also is involved in thermoregulation. This tissue will generate heat when it burns ATP to produce movement, and it can involuntarily shiver to increase the body temperature. Let's talk about cardiac muscle tissue. This tissue is involuntarily controlled, and it's found only in the heart. You'll notice the striation pattern again here. That is the light and the dark banding pattern. It's pretty clear over here. But this tissue has another set of features that make it unique. Notice each of these muscle cells stands separate from one another. There is a good deal of white space between these adjacent cells. Okay? Now, some of these cells tend to branch, and that is unique to our cardiac muscle tissue. Here's another set of branching cells. That branching pattern has to do with the fact that a nerve impulse must travel rapidly through heart muscle tissue, causing those components in the heart, the atria and the ventricles, to contract together as a unit. So this branching pattern is unique to cardiac muscle tissue. Just another view of those separate but branched cardiac muscle cells. And this picture is great because it shows us yet another unique feature of cardiac muscle tissue, and that is these specialized gap junctions here. They are called intercalated discs. Now, these intercalated discs are important because they allow for a nerve impulse to travel through quickly without having to go through the normal routine we will see later on that happens at a plasma membrane. So intercalated discs are gap junctions found uniquely in cardiac muscle tissue. So the function of cardiac muscle tissue is to contract the heart and pump blood through the heart. And of course, these contractions are involuntary. Okay, another great picture here. This one really nicely shows the striations. That is the banding pattern. And you can see these spots here are the intercalated discs or gap junctions found between neighboring cells. Our last type of muscle tissue is called smooth muscle tissue. It is so named because it lacks striations. Recall that striations are the banding patterns seen in both skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle tissue. All right, so here you see long spindle-shaped cells, and they will have like a nucleus in the center. These are uninucleate. This one looks like some adipose tissue scattered between those smooth muscle cells. Now, this type of tissue is found in the walls of our hollow organs, such as our blood vessels, our digestive organs, and our urinary organs. They perform a repetitive squeezing that's called peristalsis. And of course, this motion, peristalsis, is involuntary. Here you can see another look at a lot of smooth muscle cells. These dark spots in the center are the nuclei of those smooth muscle cells, very tightly packed here in this picture. Now, you've seen enough tissue pictures and we've discussed enough for you to be thoroughly confused at this point. So what I encourage you to do when you're studying for lab is to pull pictures out and make sure that you can tell the difference between similar pictures. In this picture, you're looking at dense, regular connective tissue on the top. On the bottom of the picture, you're looking at smooth muscle tissue. There are several really important differences here. One, dense, regular connective tissue is made up of collagen fibers running in the same direction. Collagen fibers are somewhat wavy. You do get the sense for that in the picture on the top. There are also scattered nuclei. Those nuclei belong to fibroblasts that are scattered throughout that set of collagen fibers. I'm going to draw a line right here that separates our dense regular connective tissue on the top from our muscle tissue that's shown down below. Now the smooth muscle tissue does not have the wavy appearance. That's because it's not made of collagen fibers. Secondly, those smooth muscle cells all contain a nucleus, so you tend to see a lot more of these nuclei scattered throughout this smooth muscle tissue. So be sure that you lay similar pictures like these side by side and prove to yourself that you can tell the difference between the two. Let's spend a moment talking about nervous tissue. Now the great news here, there is only the nervous tissue as a general category, and there are no specific types. The best thing to do when you look at nervous tissue is to look for neurons, which are the impulse conducting cells of the nervous tissue. This is a great picture that shows a neuron. I'm going to draw an outline around it. And this neuron kind of looks to me like a steamrolled octopus or a squid. You can see I have looked at a nice nucleus there in the center, and it is surrounded by a cell body. These extensions that come and go from the neuron are called processes, and they may be an axon or they may be dendrites. When we get into the nervous system information later in this course, we'll talk more in detail about the setup and structure of a typical neuron. Now, all the other stuff you see in the background here, this is nerve support cells called neuroglia. Literally translated, this means nerve glue. So these cells may insulate the neuron cell, they may increase the transmission of a nerve impulse, or they may simply be there to help provide protection from, say, viruses or bacteria. So neuroglia and neurons together make up nervous tissue. Another great view here of some nervous tissue. This is a neuron shown right there, pieces of other ones over here. The other background stuff that you see here, of course, is neuroglia. That's a support set of cells that help to insulate and protect those neurons. Now, there's two major functions of nervous tissue. It is to provide irritability to sense stimuli, and also it can promote muscle contractions, or it can control effector organs. So we'll talk, like I said, again, more about nervous tissue later on when we get to that chapter in this course. Not a great picture here. This is a lower magnification of nervous tissue. These neurons here are easy to spot, but they don't have their really characteristic processes that really snap out and say, hey, this is nervous tissue. Great picture of nervous tissue here. You can easily spot this neuron. I'm going to outline it for you. Okay, and these processes, of course, are either axons or dendrites that come and go from this neuron cell body, which is this area in here, and this is the neuron's nucleus in the center. All this other stuff in the background does, in fact, have some nuclei, but those are neuroglial cells. They're support cells that provide, say, protection or insulation for this neuron that you see so nicely in this picture.